What's good? It's Fevir. Today I'm going to bring to you a list of the best, or rather my favorite graphic mods for Skyrim for the Special Edition updated for 2017. Now, the thing to keep in mind about graphics is that they are entirely subjective, and with so many high quality options to choose from, you may just prefer something different. It's also important to know that the most powerful way to affect the appearance of your game is with the use of powerful ENBs and correctly lighting it. These do most of the heavy lifting and frankly just outshadow most other changes that you can make, and if you're ever comparing your game to someone else's or a really great screenshot, the answer to how do I make my game look like that 90% of the time is the ENB and lighting. That said, let's kick off this list with some texture mods, and I'm going to try to mention the type of graphics we're changing to make it a little bit more easy to substitute other mods in and out. So let's start off with my choice for an overall texture replacement, Realistic Skyrim Overhaul, and this mod has a bit of a quirk behind it as it's not available readily through Steam or the Nexus. I will put a link in the description if you do want to download it, and it has been updated for the special edition, so don't worry. This is a full texture replacer, but I end up using multiple texture replacers. For Realistic Skyrim Overhaul, I really value more of the landscape textures, so dirt and cave walls and bricks and roads, that type of stuff. I find that this mod doesn't change things up too much, and it focuses more on trying to make things, well, look more realistic. And this tends to lend itself to screenshotting and screen archery very well because of this. I then layer over top of this Noble Skyrim, and this is another overall texture replacer mod, but I'm only going to use the architecture type stuff, so buildings, roofs, pillars, doors, etc. Unlike Realistic Skyrim Overhaul, this mod does have its own style, it does change things, it does change the feeling and the way that buildings look in a way that I actually like. And if you don't want to muck around with overwriting and selectively choosing groups of textures, I'd recommend Noble over Realistic Skyrim. Then I go ahead and add Enhanced Textures Detail, and this mod is strange. I don't know exactly how it works. It says it alters the UV or the meshes or the textures to make them look better up close. Somehow it's compatible with anything, so you don't have to worry about overwriting or anything. It'll just give you almost like a higher resolution texture bump without any real performance loss. It's something you can tend to just stick in any load order, and ever since I used it, I've never not used it. On top of these, I do tend to add a few more specific individual graphics mods, Realistic Water 2 to change up the water. The default version of this mod looks incredible, but I've found myself using the watercolor preset more recently. It gives the world this kind of fantasy-esque feel, this pastel color to the water. You can't go wrong with any of the big water mods though. On top of this, I also use Nordic Snow to replace the snow. I wouldn't go out of my way to recommend such a small scoped mod, but at least a good portion of the map is snow, so you're going to notice it. It's just in the past, I've tended to use winter overhaul mods to make the entire map snowy, so I really value high quality snow textures, and when I don't have this, stuff just looks off. It also tends to play nice with most ENBs, which if you've experienced blinding snow, you know my pain. Kind of in the same vein here, there is an author, Skysan, and he has a huge suite of mods that give ice and glass and gems and bottles a type of transparency and refraction effect that I love. It's only coming up now because it also works on the types of icicles that can form, and I think the most impressive application that you can see how it works is with the Frost Atronox. I just love this mod. It shouldn't even be on this mod list because it's not a proper graphics mod, but I'm just plugging it away here. Moving away from ice and snow, let's talk about Flora, let's talk about the green stuff. I think the most commonly recommended mods are going to be Verdant and Skyrim Flora Overhaul here. And they both work really well with each other, and if I'm going to be honest with you, I would recommend them, but I do find the combination of these very overpowering to the setting of Skyrim. They don't look bad at all, but they're very transformative, right? Almost in the same way that the winter overhaul changes the way Skyrim looks and feels, so does this. So while I do recommend them, the mods that I tend to use for the Flora are simply bigger trees, which is compatible with the last two mods if you want to just go nuts, which makes all of the trees bigger and more meatier. It has an incredible atmospheric effect without changing the tone of the game. And then I pair this with unique grasses and ground covers, which adds more variation and quality to the grass, but in just a more subtle way. That's it for the more background type stuff. Looking to the foreground, looking to the small stuff, the clutter, I use 3 different mods. SMIM, Ruins Clutter Improved, and Forgotten Items Retext Project. Now these 3 mods take a large amount of the clutter items that you don't really notice or think about, like barrels or forks or irons or ladders or what have you, and they'll bump them up in appearance. Now whether this means a change in the texture or its mesh, they really just act to remove the moments where something looks so bad, so out of place, that you notice it. As with clutter, a great clutter mod should make it so that you don't notice that fork or iron. It just sort of blends into the background, it fits in with the rest of the game. And there are countless other mods that retexture single items like gold coins or a specific gem type or a tomato, and sure, those are good and they can be great too, you might love them. They're just outside of the scope of this video. I'm just going to recommend these 3 mods to get you started, and honestly, unless you're incredibly observant, you shouldn't need much more. This will just take care of all of the small stuff, or most of the small stuff. On to NPCs. Speaking for humanoids, I stick with WSEO or Windsong Skyrim Character Overhaul. This updates and improves the textures and appearance of every NPC in the game, and this is including yourself, by improving the assets used, but also messing around with face presets and the like. I prefer this mod to other NPC overhauls because it doesn't make all the characters look like cover girls, and tends to just give a much needed facelift to the look of everyone. It's also incredibly simple to use and install, with it only being 1 mod. That said, I do support it with 1 secondary mod, Superior Lore-Friendly Hair. This works as a replacer and just replaces the default hairstyles with higher quality versions, and this again affects everybody with default hair in the entire game. On to the non-human NPCs, so monsters and creatures and stuff. This is where I start to get a little bit lazy. For this, I just use the Amidian Book of Silence, the creature module. This gives a nice bump in appearance without a huge performance loss. I tend to value FPS over appearance, especially in combat, so I am purposely conservative here. That said, I do pick and choose some textures from the mod author Kwan. He has a collection that are just straight up 4K retextures of monsters of the same name as the mod, and I usually just choose monsters that I know I won't encounter in large groups, like the Dragon Priest or say the Mammoth. And now we move into weapons and armor, and this can get somewhat tricky, as with both of these things, it seems as if it's more common to look for good quality options or additions than to alter what's already there, especially in the case of armor. And what I mean by that is, like, if I found a really nice black and gold glass armor replacer, I would probably look for a standalone and either add it to the leveled lists or craft it to sort of add variation to the game. So when it comes to improvements, the mentality is slightly different. With that in mind, I use the Amidian Book of Silence for both weapons and armor as a base, which bumps up the appearance of everything very easily. For weapons, I also apply the Better Weapon Retextures, which has a partial selection of incredibly detailed and high quality textures for certain weapons, and then I'll use Lean Wolf's Better Weapons, which acts not to mess with the textures, but the shapes of weapons, right? So I find a lot of the swords in Skyrim to be incredibly broad and wide, and this just takes care of that, makes everything a little bit more slimmer. It just makes weapons look better without touching textures, and because it doesn't touch textures, it's compatible with almost everything. For armor, I tend to just stick with Amidian and add additional options as I go. This is a weird place to recommend mods because so many people will use different body replacers, whether that's the vanilla body or the UNP or the CBBE, and so what's available and works for me may not be for you. Now we're going to look at the mods that have the largest impact, the systems, so weather, lighting, and ENBs. For weather, I need to recommend Vivid Weather Special Edition. Climates of Tamriel is also really good. Vivid Weather, it works to add over 500 custom types of weather, whether that be snowstorms or thick fog or light rain or distant fog, and many different visual updates that range from altering the night sky or the clouds or the way it looks when the sun sets. It's just an incredible mod that touches so much tied to giving the game atmosphere, and if you were looking to mimic the effects of this mod with individual mods, you'd probably be looking at close to 10. It's a huge impact, and something that I found, especially with the way that I valued lighting, is fog is very important, and I think that Vivid Weather does fog the absolute best. Moving into the lighting system, I use Enhanced Lighting for ENB. Now this mod doesn't require an ENB like the title makes it seem, and while I can't really tell you why I personally prefer this lighting system over others, it's just kind of like a preference thing I do. It's subjective, but I guess if I had to, I find that it gives a nice balance between realism and playability, and it also just plays nicely with Vivid Weather, which is one of my favorite mods. Do not underestimate how important lighting systems can truly be. In fact, I wouldn't even take my word for it for enhanced lighting ENB. I would just download a whole bunch of them and see how they change the way your game looks and choose one that works for you. And finally, an ENB. ENBs are tough to recommend, which is why I'm saying an ENB. And the reason for this is there are so many profiles, right? But then when people download profiles, you can also tweak them, and many people do. Then your hardware comes into play, as ENBs tend to be capped by how powerful your computer is, so you're left making decisions over if you want higher FPS or better quality, or what ENBs you can even run. And even with similar systems, sometimes one ENB may run different for you than it runs for me, and really, you just need to dive in and try it for yourself. That said, the one I use is Rudy ENB. It's a great looking ENB that doesn't really try to alter the tone of Skyrim. In a lot of ENBs, you'll see like, oh, this one's trying to give it a very warm feeling. This one's trying to be cinematic. This one's gloomy and dark. It really feels as if with Rudy ENB, it's just Skyrim improved. It's mid-range in terms of power and performance, and is just incredibly well supported, which is important to me as I want to be able to play at 60 FPS all the time, and I want it to be up to date with changes to other mods to just reduce compatibility type stuff. I want to reiterate again just how important ENBs and lighting are. A game with 4K textures and no ENB is going to look worse than a game with 1K textures and an ENB. This is the real workhorse, and if you want to create a game that looks just right to you, you're going to need to test a bunch. You can also look into Sweet FX or Reshade profiles, which do a similar, albeit less powerful type of effect, but have a less drain on your computer. So that's going to go ahead and do it for me. Until next time, this is Fevir.